1986. I had been in the military for a few years by then, accustomed to routine, discipline, and the occasional unexpected call. But nothing could have prepared me for the one I received that morning. The radio buzzed with static before the operator's voice crackled through. "Check on Sergeant Almeida. No response to calls. Address confirmed." It was unusual. Almeida was punctual, methodical, and never ignored orders. He was stationed at the same detachment as me, and while we weren't particularly close, I knew him well enough to find this odd. I looked over at my partner, Costa, who had been driving our patrol vehicle. He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Weird. Think he overslept. I doubted it. Almeida wasn't the kind to miss a call. It was around 9 a.m. when we pulled up to his house, a small, single-story residence, identical to the others in the military neighborhood. The first thing that struck me was the front door, wide open. We both stared at it for a moment. "That's not right," Costa muttered. No, it wasn't. Soldiers didn't just leave their doors open like that. We stepped out of the vehicle, hands instinctively resting near our holsters. The silence was unsettling. The street was quiet, but something about the air felt heavy, unnatural. We approached the entrance, calling his name. No answer. I nodded to Costa. "Check the perimeter. I'll go in." He hesitated, but then nodded back, moving toward the side of the house, while I stepped inside. The air was thick, warm, carrying the faint scent of something old, almost metallic. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn just enough to let in weak sunlight. It should have been bright. It was mid-morning, but somehow, the shadows felt stretched, unnatural. Then I heard it. Faint music, barely a whisper, playing from deeper inside the house. It wasn't clear enough to recognize the song, but it felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. My heartbeat picked up. I checked the bedroom first. Empty. The bathroom. Nothing. The silence pressed against me, heavier with every step. My boots barely made a sound against the tile as I moved toward the kitchen, scanning for any sign of Almeida. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, gripping my belt. Something wasn't adding up. If he had left, why was the door open? Why was the music playing? Then I felt it, the sensation of being watched. It was sudden, electric, a primal instinct screaming at me. I turned my head toward the open doorway leading to the backyard. It was a straight path to the front door, where daylight barely reached in. And then, I saw it. A head, just peeking in from the side of the doorframe. My breath hitched. The skin was pale gray, smooth like polished stone, stretched tight over a thin, elongated skull. It had no hair, no eyebrows, no expression. But the eyes, two pitch-black holes, swallowing the dim light of the room. Deep, empty, unblinking. I froze. It didn't move. Just stood there watching me. For the first time in years, I felt something I wasn't used to fear. Slowly, I moved my hand toward my holster, my fingers brushing the grip of my sidearm. The moment I blinked, it was gone. Not a sound, not a movement, just gone. A cold sweat broke down my back. I forced myself to take a step forward. My eyes locked on where it had been. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Costa." My voice was barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, footsteps approaching from outside. Costa appeared at the side of the house, his face unreadable. "No sign of him," he said. "You." I stared at him for a long moment. I could still feel the presence. lingering like a phantom touch on my skin. No, I stepped outside, suddenly desperate to be out of that house. Something had been in there with me, and it wasn't Almeida. I didn't say anything to Costa. Not yet. The silence between us felt thick as we got back into the patrol car. I kept my eyes on the house, half expecting to see that thing peeking from behind the door again. But there was nothing, just an empty doorway and the strange weight in my chest that told me something was deeply wrong. So, Costa finally broke the silence as he started the engine. "What do you think happened?" I hesitated. If I told him what I saw, what could I even say? That a faceless thing was lurking in Almeida's house? That I felt something watching me? It sounded insane, even in my own head. "I don't know," I finally muttered. "But something's off." Costa sighed, nodding as he pulled away from the curb. "Yeah, that whole place felt weird." That made me look at him. Weird how? He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Just heavy, you know, like the air was thick." He shook his head. "Could be nothing. Maybe I'm just tired." But I knew what I felt in there. And whatever Costa was sensing, it wasn't nothing. We drove straight to the command post to report Almeida missing. The officer in charge took down the information without much reaction, just nodding along. "We'll look into it," he said. He might have just left without telling anyone. That didn't sit right with me. Almeida wasn't the type to vanish without a word. And if he had left, why was his front door wide open? Why was the music still playing? I wanted to press the issue, but something told me it wouldn't matter. No one else felt what I felt in that house. No one saw what I saw. And maybe that was for the best. That night, I couldn't sleep. The barracks were quiet, the dim light from the hallway casting long shadows across the ceiling. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The pale gray skin, the empty black eyes, the way it just stood there, watching. I turned over in my bunk, staring at the door. It wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. But then, a noise. Soft, faint, like whispering. My body tensed immediately. It was coming from outside the barracks. Slowly, I sat up, my pulse hammering in my ears. The whispering was steady, rhythmic, but I couldn't make out the words. I moved to the window, my breath shallow, careful not to make a sound. I expected to see shadows shifting under the streetlights, maybe a couple of soldiers talking outside. But instead, there was no one there, just the empty yard, the dim glow of the lamps, and the whispers, still there, still close. But I saw nothing. My skin prickled. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe I was imagining it. Then, a shadow moved. Not walking, not passing by. It was there 1 second, gone the next. My chest tightened. It was near the tree line, just beyond the light. A figure, tall, motionless, watching. I knew that shape, the same as before, the same thing I saw in Almeida's house. I stepped away from the window, my hands clammy, my heart pounding. It had followed me. I turned for my locker, fumbling for my sidearm. If it was real, I needed to be ready. I glanced back toward the window. Nothing. Just empty darkness. The whispers were gone. The shadow was gone. And yet, I could still feel it. The next morning, I told Costa we had to go back. "Back where?" he asked, sipping his coffee. "Almeida's house." He raised an eyebrow. "You think we missed something?" I hesitated. gripping my cup. I just need to see it again. Costa studied me for a moment, then sighed. Fine, but if Almeida's there, you're explaining why we're back. We got in the patrol car and drove out. As we turned onto Almeida Street, a cold weight settled in my stomach. The front door was still open, just like yesterday, like it was waiting for us. The house looked the same. The open door, the dark interior, the same unnatural silence pressing down on the air like a heavy fog. Costa parked the car, letting out a slow breath. All right, let's get this over with. We stepped out, and from the very first moment my boots touched the ground, I felt it again, that sensation of being watched. I kept my hand near my holster as we approached. The music from yesterday was gone. The house was dead quiet now. That made it worse. Costa pushed the door open fully, stepping inside first. I followed, every muscle in my body tense. The living room was untouched. Same furniture, same mess, same eerie stillness. But something about it felt wrong. Like we were walking into a place that didn't want us there. Costa glanced back at me. All right, we checked the rooms and then we're done. I nodded, moving toward the hallway. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. The bedroom was just as empty as before. The bed was unmade, the closet door slightly ajar. I checked inside. Nothing. Costa called from the kitchen. Clear here. But when I turned to leave the room, I froze. The closet door was open wider than before. I hadn't touched it. A cold sensation crept down my spine. I knew it had only been slightly open when I walked in. I swallowed hard, gripping my sidearm. I took a slow step back. My eyes locked on the darkness inside the closet. Something moved. Just a fraction of a second, but I saw it, a shift in the shadows. Breathing. Shallow. Not mine. A hand shot out. Pale, long fingers, stretching toward me fast. I stumbled back, slamming into the nightstand, knocking over a lamp. The bulb shattered. Costa was there in an instant. What the hell? I pointed my gun at the closet, panting, but the hand was gone. The closet was empty, but I knew what I saw. We left the house immediately. I barely heard Costa talking as we got back to the car. My mind was racing. I needed to get out of there. But as I reached for the door handle, I felt something, like eyes, staring. I turned my head. The window, the bedroom window. There was a face. Pale, hollow eyes. Thin lips stretched into the faintest, twisted smile. And then it was gone. We didn't talk much on the way back. Costa was tense, tapping his fingers on the wheel. Finally, he glanced at me. You saw something, didn't you? I hesitated, then nodded. He sighed. I knew it. That place isn't right. I looked out the window, my jaw clenched. We need to find Almeida. Costa didn't argue. That night, I stayed awake again. The barracks were silent. No whispers this time. No shadows. But I knew it was still out there, waiting. And I wasn't sure if it was watching just me, or if it had already followed me inside. We found Almeida the next day. It wasn't easy. He had transferred out months ago. But a few calls later, we tracked him down to a small station on the outskirts of the city. He didn't sound happy to hear from us. But when I told him we needed to talk about the house, he went silent. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Meet me at Bar du Nunes. Tonight, 9 o'clock. And he hung up. The bar was dimly lit. smelling of beer and cigarettes. A place where old cops went to drink away things they didn't want to remember. Almeida was already there when we arrived. He looked different, older, tired. His uniform was wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. When he saw us, he let out a heavy sigh. I knew someone would come looking eventually. Costa and I sat down. I leaned in. What the hell happened in that house? Almeida stared at me for a long moment. Then he took a sip of his drink and spoke. That place is cursed. He ran a hand over his face. It started before I even moved in. Weird noises at night, scratching in walls, the feeling that I was never alone. His voice dropped lower. Then I started seeing it. I stiffened. You mean? He nodded. The thing with the hollow eyes. Costa swore under his breath. Almeida kept talking. First, it was just glimpses. A shadow in the hallway. A reflection in the mirror. But then it got worse. His hands gripped his glass. I'd wake up with it standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. A chill ran down my spine. And then one night, he swallowed. It spoke. Silence. Even in the crowded bar, it felt like the world had gone quiet. Costa shifted in his seat. What did it say? Almeida's face was pale. It told me to leave, that the house was remembering. I felt my throat go dry. Remembering what? Almeida shook his head. I don't know, but I didn't wait to find out. I put in for a transfer the next morning, and when I left, he hesitated. I leaned forward. When you left, what? His voice was barely above a whisper. It was watching me, from the window. My stomach twisted, because I had seen it there too. We sat in silence for a while after that. Finally, Almeida sighed. Look, if you're smart, you'll stop asking questions. That place doesn't forget. The more you dig, the more it notices you. His eyes met mine. And trust me, you don't want it to notice you. I swallowed hard, because deep down I already knew. It had already noticed me. That night, back in my barracks, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building made my skin crawl. Every shadow in the corner of my room felt too dark. I turned over, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself Almeida was just paranoid, that we were all just seeing things. But then, a sound. Soft. Tap, tap, tap. My blood went cold. It was coming from my window. Slow. Rhythmic. Like fingernails against the glass. I didn't want to look. But I had to. I turned my head and froze. There it was. Pale. Hollow eyes. A thin, twisted smile. Watching me. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. And then, it raised its hand and waved. The lights flickered. And in the split second of darkness, it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, staring at the window, waiting for something, anything, to happen again. But nothing did. When morning came, I made a decision. I had to go back to the house. I had to know the truth. Costa thought I was insane. You saw that thing at your window, and your first instinct is to go back. What the hell is wrong with you? I couldn't explain it. Something about what Almeida said. The house is remembering. Remembering what? And why did it suddenly notice me now? I had to know. Costa shook his head. If you're going, I'm going with you. And just like that, we were back in the patrol car, heading toward the place I swore I'd never return to. The house was just as we had left it. dark, silent, watching. The door creaked as we stepped inside. Dust floated in the air, caught in the dim light from the windows. The same eerie silence, the same oppressive feeling pressing against my chest. But something was different. I could feel it. Costa moved ahead cautiously, his hand resting on his holster. What exactly are we looking for? I didn't know. But then, a noise. Soft, scraping. From the back of the house. Costa pulled his gun. What the hell was that? We followed the sound, our footsteps slow and careful. It led us to a door, one we hadn't noticed before. I reached for the handle. The second my fingers touched it, bang, something slammed against it from the other side. Costa jumped back, cursing. My heart pounded in my chest. Slowly, I pushed the door open. It was a basement. Cold air rushed past us as we stepped inside. The stairs creaked beneath our boots. At the bottom, a room. Small, windowless. A rotting wooden chair in the center. Chains hung from the ceiling. And on the walls, scratch marks. Deep, jagged, like someone had tried to claw their way out. Costa swallowed hard. Jesus Christ. That's when we noticed it. In the corner of the room, a small pile of bones. My stomach turned. Not human. Animal. Scattered. Torn apart. But among them, something else. A photograph. I picked it up. The edges were burnt, the image faded. But I could still make out the faces. A family. A man, a woman, and a child. Costa pointed at the bottom of the photo. There was something written there. A name. Almeida. My blood ran cold. The sound came again. Scraping. From behind us. Slow. Deliberate. Costa and I turned at the same time. And froze. It was there. Standing in the doorway. Pale skin. Hollow black eyes. A twisted grin stretching across its face. Watching us. Costa pulled his gun. Don't move. But it didn't listen. It laughed. Silent. Mouth open wide, shoulders shaking. Then, it stepped forward. Costa fired. Bang, bang, bang. The shots echoed through the basement. When the smoke cleared, it was gone. Nothing but silence. I turned to Costa and saw his face drain of color. Look. I followed his gaze. Back to the photograph. It had changed. The family was still there. The man, the woman. But the child, its face was gone, replaced by two hollow black holes. We ran. I don't remember how we got out. I don't remember getting in the car or driving away. All I remember is the feeling, like something was chasing us, something we couldn't see. By the time we got back to the station, Almeida was waiting for us. He looked at me, then at Costa. Then he sighed. You went back. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He shook his head. Now it knows you. I swallowed. What the hell is it? Almeida looked past me, like he was staring at something I couldn't see. Then he whispered, "The house remembers," and walked away. I transferred out a week later. Costa too. Neither of us ever spoke about it again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. Tap, 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 at my window. Waiting, watching, and I know it hasn't forgotten me. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Fear and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Here, you'll find more real stories filled with mystery, psychological horror, and the supernatural every week. Before you go, make sure to check out the 2 videos that just popped up in the end screen. I promise, they'll leave you with goosebumps. See you next time, if you dare.